last night, my wife and I, we had a little bit of a disagreement / argument, and our youngest daughter overheard it, and she got a little concerned with the divorce rates, the way that they are, and people that we know that have gotten divorces. Our daughter got a little scared and thought something was going to cause my wife and I to get a divorce, which is the crux of today's episode, because one, my wife and I are not getting a divorce, and we will never get a divorce because we've agreed to commit to one another. So that's first and foremost. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about today is it's almost taboo to talk to our children about arguments. Now, I'm not going to say that we should go super deep into the content of whatever the argument is, but if our children, especially our daughter who's 11 years old, she can understand things and she's witnessed people getting divorces, it's a good idea to have a discussion with your children. And that's really what I want to talk about and just share some reasons of why that's a thing. So stay tuned and we're going to dive into this episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Husband Coach's Corner. I know it's been a while since I released some content, and then I come back with an episode talking about why we should talk to our kids about arguments that we may have with our wives. And look, I get it. That's a little heavy and not as simple coming back, but it's something that really did spur up the need for me to turn on a camera because I have been very, very busy, spread in so many different directions, trying to take care of things that in my personal life as well as in my professional life. So I just wanted to really share this because I have two girls, a 11-year-old and a 14-year-old, and both of them have experienced divorce with their friends' families. And that's where our children, they get a little confused when my wife and I have a disagreement, a dispute, or an argument. And I will mention that our arguments or our disagreements, they never turn violent or physical or in any way, shape, or form to the degree that would cause any harm or concern. But my wife and I are very passionate about our stance in things that we have, and our children pick up on that, and they know when we're being, I guess we can say aggressive, but not in a unloving way, just in a I'm unwilling to budge right now. And yes, as the husband coach, I am unwilling to budge on certain things, and my wife knows this about me, and so we talk about those things. But this is not something that, when we talk about arguing, we have to talk about it in a healthy way, or having a disagreement, we talk about it in a healthy way. My wife and I absolutely argue or fight fair, but to a kid who has seen her friends' parents get divorced and the impacts that has on the families and the impact that has on their relationship with their friend, the impact that has on the kid themselves that is going through a divorce in a family, all of those things combined really do cause some challenges for our children today. And that's why I really wanted to share some thoughts about that. So the first thought that I have in regards to talking to your kids about arguing is really managing expectations. All right. It is unrealistic for our children to believe that mommy and daddy don't argue. It's like this fantasy land, this happily ever after that is not reality, because that's just not true. My wife and I, we argue, we disagree, we have conflict, and that is a thing. I've done a whole episode on conflict in marriage and how husbands should handle that. And I still follow that to the letter of what I explained, and maybe even more so as my wife and I have matured in our marriage. But that doesn't mean that our children should think that mom and dad don't argue, even if it's over something that's extremely trivial. It's good for our kids to know that that happens, because when our children, regardless of if you have boys or girls, when they go out and they start to date and they start to move towards marriage, it's a good idea for them to understand that married people argue. And we sometimes want our kids to think about about this fantasy of marriage and they fantasize about the perfect relationship. And that's just not a good reality for our kids to grow up in. And it's not a reality that my wife and I are going to allow our children to live in. So we do talk to them when we have a disagreement. And sometimes the disagreement is in front of them just so they can get an idea of what a healthy argument looks like or a healthy disagreement looks like. This is not me saying that we should invite our children in to our disagreements, right? Because I'm very quick to correct my children when it's not their place to have a discussion or to have a comment while my wife and I are having a disagreement, if it's on a road trip or wherever it may be. And I'm not like mean to my children about it. I'll just say, hey, this isn't your place to discuss right now, right? I'm very straightforward. My kids understand that. They stop talking and they let my wife and I finish our discussion or our conflict, whatever it may be. But that is something you have to develop over time. If you are using profanity and you are like, getting loud, one, you should never have to raise your voice. You could have a disagreement and not raise your voice. All right. I understand, yesterday I did raise my voice a little bit because I got a little bit more passionate than I normally do, but it wasn't me raising my voice in an aggressive tone where I wanted to hurt my wife or where my wife even felt like she was in danger. She just realized like, hey, this is a topic that we're both unwilling to budge on, and we wanted to share our minds. And that is a beautiful thing. I'll talk about that later on because I think it's important for us to understand how to fight fair in a marriage or in a conflict. But back to the point of how do you do this in front of a child or in front of a minor or your children in general? Because maybe you have an adult child where they don't live in a fantasy world and maybe they're even married and you still are having arguments. How do you have that conflict or disagreement in front of an older child? Well, I'm going to speak in philosophical terms here because, again, my children are 11 and 14. However, I've dealt with conflict management at work with adults around where we have other colleagues that we have to, that I can't get the colleagues to leave, and I still have to deal with the conflict at work as a supervisor, and or sometimes even peer-to-peer conflicts where there are subordinates. So that's why I'm speaking philosophically. The way that I handle that is by simply stating what the facts are about the circumstance or the situation. And then I take more time to listen to the individual that is sharing whatever their issue is. So, in the case of work, if someone says, hey, I really need to spend money on this, and I disagree, and you can tell that there's a tension because I'm managing how much our budget is being used, then I listen to them and hear what they have to say. And then I go back and I say, well, no, this is actually why we can't spend that money. I don't have to argue. I don't have to yell. It's a disagreement. It's conflict, but there's ways of dealing with it. All right. Now, if it gets to a point where it's unprofessional or in the context of marriage, where it is inappropriate for your children to kind of be witness of that sort of conflict, then that's when you say, hey, let's take this somewhere else, or you ask the kids to leave, regardless of what their age is, right? They're still your children. You have an authority over them as a parent, but make it make sense. Or you can say, hey, let's put a pin in this. We'll talk about it later. So the first reason, if it just wasn't clear, first reason why you should talk to your children about an argument is to keep them out of the fantasy land and let them know that people will disagree. And when they get married and when they have their relationships, they're going to run into these same types of issues, and it is okay. There's ways of working through it. All right. The second reason why you should talk to your children, and I think that this is more important, but I wanted to set the tone with the future aspect so that way you can start thinking about why this is one of those things, just to shape it. The second reason is because it helps your children understand where your relationship is actually going, and it shows them the maturity. It also helps them from thinking that there's a potential divorce. This is a huge thing because last night when we were talking to our daughter, after she heard us have our argument or disagreement, our daughter was a little nervous. And this isn't the first time that she's heard us argue or disagree. We've talked many times in front of her. She's heard it before. And for some reason last night, maybe she was just a little bit more emotional. But we picked up on that after we walked out of my office, because we had the discussion in here. And let me tell you, these walls are super thin. So no matter what we said, no matter how I said it, it was going to get shared across the house, especially since my daughter was in the living room, which is just a little bit down the hall from here, and you could still hear. So the point that I want to make is, when we walked out of here, my wife and I both made amends before we walked out. We weren't in bad spirits, and we dealt with it, right? Because that's what adults do when they have conflict. We deal with it. But when we seen our daughter, she looked a little nervous to be around us because she didn't understand what was happening. So in that moment, my wife started talking to her, and I just, stood there and let my wife share things. And my daughter was very concerned about what she should say that she heard and what she shouldn't say that she heard. And we didn't have it was a conflict about some time that I spent with the family. So it wasn't anything that was dangerous or sexual in nature, anything like that. It was just more so how I'm spending time with the family. Again, very busy, which is why I haven't been producing content until this particular video. I am still working on figuring out what that schedule looks like. And so that's where our conflict came in, because I do things that I need to do for work. I do things that I need to do just for my mental health. I do things that I need to do for my spiritual growth. And then it's like, okay, where is the balance with the family? Because all of these things are still priorities, things that need to happen. And there's only so much time in the day. So that was the nature of our discussion / conflict. I stood my ground, shared what was going on, how I was trying to fix the issue, and just explain it's a season of life. So that's what my daughter overheard, and she was a little concerned because she was thinking that I was saying I didn't want to spend time with the family, and so she didn't want to say that in front of me. And that's where I had to step in and say, well, time out. Here's the deal. I do spend time with the family. Here's what we've been doing this summer. We have plans that are still on the calendar for the summer. We've been doing things over the summer, and I had to put her back into perspective of what we're doing to spend time as a family. So this isn't a conflict that really impacted her. So a little more information than you probably needed, but just to give context to why she was so shy at sharing what it is that she was feeling. So after we talked to her and she understood, she was in great spirits. She realized, like, okay, my mom and dad are not going to get a divorce. And I don't know why she thought that conversation would have been a divorce driven conversation, because there was nothing in that conversation that was even remotely close to divorce worthiness. Now, the third reason, and this will be my final point, why you should talk to your kids about arguments that you and your wife have, and, outside of keeping them in a healthy perspective, is to reassure them that you're not getting a divorce. Now, I know that can be a hard statement for many people to promise and guarantee. And this is the reason why I started this podcast, because I want to make an impact in marriages in a way that they're enriched and that they grow. So you don't have to consider divorce, and you can take that off the table altogether. Marriages do not need to end in divorce. They don't need to end at all. You can build your marriage. You can truly improve your marriage. Now, that means it's going to take some commitment, and it's going to take hard work. And when you are committed to doing something, you're going to put in the effort and time to build that marriage. That may mean you miss out on some other things. That may mean you don't get to buy certain things that you really want. Again, missing out on stuff. That's going to be the cost of building your marriage. And if you think that because if I get a divorce, then I'll just be able to start over, well, you're delusioned. All right. That is a grand delusion that I'll be able to start over and my second marriage will be that much better, or my third marriage will be that much better. There are so many divorced men and women that I talk to that say, like, man, I really could have worked on my marriage better, but I just just decided to give up. And that's something that you have to make a commitment with your wife. I do recommend that you do something similar in your own marriage, because the way that you celebrate your marriage, at least the way that my wife and I celebrate our marriage, is by honoring what we've gone through, not by trying to hide it or erase it. Because I've done some stupid things in our marriage, and I will probably continue to do some stupid things in our marriage. However, I'm going to continue to build off of this. I've said it many times to you guys. I am still working through building my marriage, because it's not a destination, it's a journey. And that journey goes in many different directions based off of the season of life that you're in. So I'm not trying to get to the end. I'm just enjoying the process of building my marriage with my wife and building this relationship, because no relationship is ever built perfectly to the point that it can't continue to grow. It just isn't. And that's what I would like for everyone who listens to this podcast, men and women alike, to realize that it's a good idea to build your marriage over time, every year, recommitting to each other. So to land the plane, it's a great idea to talk to your kids about arguments within reason, because it keeps them out of a fantasy land. It makes them know that you are still committed and that people argue, and this is okay. In a relationship, people argue. All right. When you do this, you're not only going to build your marriage, but you're also going to build the relationship with your children. They're going to have more respect for your marriage. They're going to have more understanding about real relationships, because your marriage is the model that they're going to use to build their own marriage. And if you give a bad model, then they're going to have a bad foundation of what a good marriage looks like. Now, I say these terms bad and good. Those are what I like to say subjective general speak, because there's no real detail to it. However, everything that I teach in my content here on the Husband Coach's Corner, I would say are the detailed pieces of making a good foundation for your marriage, so that way it can grow. I hope this podcast, this episode, the content that I shared here today was value added to you, and I hope to bring more content in the near future. But until the next time, I want you guys to find a way to love your wife every day. Peace.